Welcome to World Affairs Today, brought to you by the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C., a leading forum for global education and international affairs.
Let me tell you something about this man, John Perkins, the economic hitman. This is a fellow who could start a riot in a monastery or in a nunnery with equal ease. He's what we call in Ireland a stir-the-pot. He's provocative, but he's fact-based in what he's going to share with you tonight. I read with great interest his books before coming to this podium tonight. And John was a chief economist at Chase, Maine, where he advised the World Bank, United Nations, IMF, US Treasury, Fortune 500 corporations, and leaders of countries in Africa, Asia, Latin America, and the Middle East. He was also a Peace Corps volunteer in Ecuador from 68 through 70. Awarded the Lenin I Grant for Peace in 2012. He won the Rainforest Action Network Challenging Business as Usual Award in 2006. Quit his job in Maine in 1980 and for 2 decades worked as a consultant, entrepreneur, and specialist on the culture and practices of indigenous people of Latin America. He founded and is a board member of Dream Change and the Pachamama Alliance, nonprofit organizations devoted to establishing a world future generations will want to inherit. He's lectured at Harvard, Oxford, and more colleges than I care to list. He has authored 9 books and 3 documentaries, been featured on every major television program, both domestically and I would say worldwide. Landon Thomas Jr. of the New York Times wrote that, quote, "There is a rich literary tradition spanning more than 80 years of corporate insiders writing books in confessional vein that puncture the secretive, less seemly aspects of their profession," which is a nice way of saying this is a man who takes the mask off various entities and confronts them with a truth. Though there was controversy surrounding the publication of Confessions of an Economic Hitman in 2006, it spent 73 weeks on the New York Times nonfiction bestseller list. It was translated into 32 languages and sold more than 1.25 million copies. Nicholas Lazard of The Guardian wrote, "The book's central message makes the news look rather different." The new Confessions of an Economic Hitman contains new details on how he and others economic hitmen cheated countries around the globe out of trillions of dollars. It reveals how the deadly economic hitman cancer John helped create has spread far more widely and deeply than ever. He provides an insider view of what we can each do to change the situation. The book brings the chilling story of economic hitmen and jackal assassins up to date and home to a U.S. audience. It provides practical strategies to transform the failing death global economy into a regenerative life economy. The former economic minister of Greece, Yanis Yavaris, said, "When I read Confessions of an Economic Hitman, I could not have known that some years later I would be on the receiving end of the type of economic hit that Perkins so vividly narrated." Perkins has once again made a substantial contribution to a world that needs whistleblowers to open its eyes to the true sources of political, social, and economic power. good observations vis-a-vis the race that is currently on for the presidency of the United States of America. It's my hope that the people in this room base most of their lives' ethics on the facts and the truth. John's an exemplar in that arena, and it's with great pride I ask him to come to our podium tonight and share his views with you. John Perkins.
Thank you, Tony, and thank all of you for being here. You know, I have to say, having to follow Tony up here on the podium is a little bit, I'm from New Hampshire, ski country. It's a little bit like standing at the top of an awesome ski jump and looking down and deciding that you're not going to jump. And then someone pushes you. Following Tony up here is a little bit like being pushed off that ski jump because thank you for that introduction, Tony. I'm going to use this because I kind of like to walk around. It keeps me awake when I'm here, but it's wonderful to be here. And I think, you know, it does beg the question, why would I write the new Confessions of an Economic Hitman 12 years after the original? And I think the obvious answer to that is that we all know that we're in trouble. We all know the glaciers are melting, the oceans are rising, there's climate change, violence, terrorism. We've, in the last 12 years, the economic hitman system has expanded, it's spread from the developing countries that I talk about, where I was an economic hitman, to the United States, to Europe, and the rest of the world. And it's created a failed global economy. I'll talk more about that in a few moments, but one of the many statistics is that less than 5% of the world's population lives in the United States, and we consume almost 30% of the world's resources. Well, half the world's starving or on the verge of starvation. That's not a model. China, with 19% of the world's population, can't do it no matter how hard they try. The numbers don't add up. So we really must change. We understand now that we've come to a time when we must change. So this new Confessions of an Economic Hitman it talks about these issues in more detail, but also presents a strategy for making that change. How do we change? And that's an essential question. How do we change? And I think it's fair to say that human history is filled with examples of times when we've overcome what seemed like insurmountable odds. You know, some good examples: World War I, World War II, the Great Depression, Stalinism. All of these things required the marshaling of human and natural resources and tremendous energy to make this happen. Each required a transformation in our view of reality, a change in consciousness, a change in mindsets. And before I get into more detail, I'd like to share with you a personal story that I think tells something about this whole mindset issue. And I am going to walk around a little bit, but this is a funny story, so you're all looking very serious here tonight. I know I'm in Washington, D.C., but still, you can laugh at this one. It's funny now, it wasn't when it happened. Tony mentioned that I was in the Peace Corps after I got out of business school, and the Peace Corps sent me to 8 weeks of training to learn Spanish, which if you speak another language, you know 8 weeks isn't a lot of time to learn a language, and to learn to be a credit and savings co-op specialist. I graduated from business school. And then they sent me deep into the Amazon to live with the Shuar people. How many of you have seen a shrunken head or a picture of one? The Shuar did it. There are other head hunters, but they're the only head shrinkers. So here I am, I'm a 2-day drive from the nearest city, a 2-day walk through the jungle, and suddenly I find myself amongst the Shuar who don't speak Spanish. They speak Shuar. So my first introduction to U.S. government work is they teach you a language and send you someplace where nobody speaks it. My next introduction was I announced there's one guy in the town who speaks Spanish. That's the school teacher. He's come from up in the Andes. And I tell him, well, I'm here to help you guys form your credit and savings co-ops. And he looks around like, credit and savings? We don't have any money. It's all barter, you know. My bananas for your papayas. So I very quickly have to accept the fact that all my education and experience has nothing to offer these people, but they had a lot to teach me. And one of the things I learned very quickly, because after a number of weeks there, I got very, very sick. I lost a tremendous amount of weight, probably 20 pounds. I didn't have scales, so I'm not sure. In a very short period of time, I was dying. And I was a 2-day walk through dense jungle to the nearest road and another 2 days journey in a rickety old wooden bus up over the Andes to the nearest doctor. Couldn't possibly do it. So I was resigned to dying. And late one afternoon, the one guy who spoke English, the school teacher, comes up to me, and he's leading this decrepit-looking old, tiny Schwa man by the hand. He comes up to me, and he says, "This guy's the shaman." I'm like, I'm from New Hampshire. What's a shaman? You mean a witch doctor? And he says, well, he could heal you. Got my attention. So this old guy, he steps back and he looks at my feet, and he looks at my head, he looks me up and down, he scans my body, and then he walks up real close to me. He's really short, and he shakes his fist in my face, and he says, "You're dying." And that's good, because the Schwa believe in reincarnation. And he figured this was about as bad as it could get. You know, this guy's coming in here, he doesn't speak the language, he can't shoot a blowgun, he doesn't know how to track jaguars. You know, he's not going to be long for this world anyway, so get it over with, you know, get on with it. Become a jaguar or an anaconda or something or other, you know. And at this point, I think I began crying. And he looks and he says, well, damn, you know, maybe you're not ready. In which case, I can heal you tonight. I think I'll take it. And he did. That night, he took me on a traditional shamanic ceremony. I write in detail about this in New Confessions of an Economic Hitman. But essentially what happened was, you know, he couldn't speak to me. It was all done with music and so on. But essentially what happened was that night, I saw that I grew up in well over 300 years of Yankee Calvinists from New Hampshire and Vermont. Very hygienic people. We washed our hands a lot. And we ate very boring foods, you know, meat and potatoes, essentially, you know, no onions, no garlic, nothing interesting. Now suddenly I'm living with the Schwa. They've never seen a bar of soap. And the food, well, you don't really want to hear about it, but a favorite food is you reach into a rotting tree and pull out a handful of squirming white grubs and down the hatch. And in the Amazon, nobody drinks water, because the water is filled with organic matter, falls into the rivers. So they drink a kind of a beer that's made out of the women chewing manioc root and spitting it. It ferments, and then you can into a kind of a beer called chicha, and then you can pour some water in that and so on. And anyway, you drink a lot of this stuff because you have to rehydrate a lot in the Amazon. A lot of spit beer. I know at least somebody in this room has had chicha. Who's had chicha here? You've had chicha. Wasn't it delicious? Yes. Well, I was drinking a lot of chicha because there wasn't any Perrier. And eating a lot of squirming white grubs and other things I'm not going to describe for you because there weren't any Cliff Bars, you know. And on this shamanic journey, what I saw was that every time I ate these foods or drank this chicha, I heard a voice saying, "Son, it'll kill you." At the same time, I saw how healthy the Schwa are. The men are built like Tarzan. They carry dead boars out of the woods, 350-pound animals on their shoulders. The women, well, I was in my early 20s. The women were looking really good. And the people live to be very old if they're not killed in a hunting accident or something. So what I saw that night is that what was killing me was not an objective reality. It was a created reality, an imagined reality, a mindset that told me that this food would kill me. It wasn't killing them. The next morning, I was perfectly healthy. And a couple of days later, the shaman comes back with his translator and says, you're cured. You owe me. What he demanded is I become his apprentice, which at the time I had no interest. I just got out of business school. I'd never heard of a shaman. There was no future in that, Today there's a future in shamanism, but in those days there wasn't. But he saved my life, so I became his apprentice. And then later on I studied with shamans in many other parts of the world. And one of the things that I really got over and over was this business of mindset, that we have two realities. Where there's an objective reality. This microphone, this is an objective reality. But what I talk about through this microphone is an imagined or perceived reality. And in fact, human beings, as far as we know, are the only living creatures whose lives are controlled, deeply impacted by an imagined reality. Culture is an imagined reality. Religion is an imagined reality. Most of our concepts are imagined realities. Countries are imagined realities. There's no United States, Canada, Mexico, China, Russia. We create this reality and then we codify it into law. So these things actually have a huge impact on the objective realities. But it's all created by us. Our economy is a perceived reality. It's not an objective reality. And if you think about how do we change things, it's easy. We change the perception of the reality, and every major revolution has been about that. And one example, the American Revolution. So the perceived reality was it would be absolutely impossible to defeat the most powerful army in the world, the British military, Army and Navy. Couldn't do it. And then along comes Tom Paine and Thomas Jefferson and George Washington, and they say, no, we can defeat them. All we got to do is hide behind trees like the Indians, and they line up out there with all these red coats on. They're great targets. And that changed the whole perceived reality. Every revolution is about changing that perceived reality. And today, the reality is something that we must really look at. So there is an objective reality, I think, which is that the system today is run by corporations. They really control the world. And our government and every other government in the world is deeply, deeply impacted by corporations. That's a reality. They are truly global. They exert strong, strong influence on governments. And many people lament that fact. I actually see it as a tremendous opportunity for hope and for change. Corporations, after all, have this ability to channel incredible brilliance, to bring together teams of people, lawyers, financiers, entrepreneurs, inventors, all kinds of people, to bring them together to create products, goods and services, all kinds of things. And so the objective reality here is that corporations have this power. The problem is not in the objective reality. It's really in the imagined reality of how we define what it means to be a successful corporation, of the role of corporations in our lives. For the first 100 years after that revolution, for the first 100 years, no corporation could get a charter in any state in the United States unless it guaranteed that it was going to serve a public interest. It was nothing about profits. And on average, that charter lasted 10 years. And then the corporation had to go back and prove that it had in fact served a public interest and would continue to do so. That all changed in the late 1800s when John D. Rockefeller convinced the state of Delaware that if they allowed him not to make that guarantee with his oil companies, the legislators in the state could make a lot of money. And then it went to New Jersey and so on. And as we all know, it's gotten pretty severe recently with some of the acts of the judicial system of the Supreme Court and so on, where corporations have become so powerful. And really what's behind that is a radical change that happened in the 1970s. So when I went to business school in the late 60s, I was taught that a good CEO makes a decent rate of return for his investors. But he also takes really good care of his employees. A good CEO does not lay anyone off without first taking a cut in salary. Imagine that. And a good CEO takes really good care of his suppliers and his customers and is a good citizen in the community. A corporation not only pays taxes, imagine that, but also contributes money to the local education system and recreational facilities and so on and so forth. That's what I was taught in the late 60s. It was Keynesian economics. It had many problems, but it also had that side that sort of reflected back what had happened during the first 100 years of serving a public interest. That all changed in the 70s when Milton Friedman won the Nobel Prize and, amongst other things, said, no, the only responsibility of a corporation is to maximize profits, regardless of the social and environmental costs. That's a perceived and imagined reality, but it has defined ever since the goal of corporations. Every corporation's bought into it, our government's bought into it, every president, beginning with Reagan, bought into it, but every Democrat and every Republican president since has bought into that idea that the sole goal of corporations is to maximize profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. And that's actually created an atmosphere which has given license to CEOs. In fact, it's actually made it almost mandatory for CEOs to do anything they think that's necessary to maximize their profits, including bribing politicians. But it's not bribery anymore because it's legal to make huge donations to these campaign funds and to let politicians know, hey, if you lose, you get a very lucrative job as a consultant to us. You're our guy. So this idea of maximizing profits, it's a new one. And it's a perceived reality that must change. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. How did we get to this system we have? And I think I want to talk a little bit about what I did as an economic hitman, because I think that kind of defines this system. So the primary thing that I did lots of things, but the primary thing that economic hitmen do is that we will identify a country with resources our corporations covet, like oil, and then arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sister organizations or Wall Street. But the money actually doesn't go to the country. It goes to our corporations to build big infrastructure projects in the country, power plants, industrial parks, highways, ports, and so forth, that benefit, in addition to our corporations, a few wealthy families in the country. But the majority of the people suffer because money is diverted from education, healthcare, and other social services to try to pay off the interest on the debt. In the end, the principal is never paid off. We go back and say, hey, since you can't pay your debts, sell your oil or whatever the resource is real cheap to our corporations without any social regulations or environmental restrictions, or privatize. Sell your electric utility, your water and sewage system, your schools, your jails, every public sector business off to our corporations. And in the few cases where we fail, what we call the jackals go in. These are people that either overthrow governments or assassinate the leaders. And I talk in the New Confessions of an Economic Hitman in some detail about how two of my clients, democratically elected president of Ecuador, Jaime Roldos, and the head of state of Panama, Omar Torrijos, and Omar especially became a very close friend of mine, they wouldn't buy this system. They would not indebt their countries. They had tremendous integrity, and both of them were assassinated, taken out. And the United States has actually admitted that we've done this to Allende of Chile and Arbenz of Guatemala, Mossadegh of Iran, Lumumba of the Congo, Diem of Vietnam. This is an objective reality, a sad one. And I talk about these things because I see myself as a very loyal American. My family fought in the American Revolution and every war since, and I don't like what's happening. And we've got to change it. And we have to change it not just because that's the way we should do things, but because the old system is totally falling apart. It's created a global economic system that threatens to destroy the world as we know it. It's created what I call, what a lot of people are beginning to call, a death economy. It's an economy that's based on debt, fear, and the destruction of the very resources upon which the economy depends. It isn't working. You know, there's so many statistics. I quoted one earlier, 5% of us consuming 30% of the world's resources. You know, another one that just made the news recently is, well, a year ago, I would have told you that there's 85 individuals who have as many assets as half the world's population. That's no longer true. It's now 62. 62 individuals have as many assets as half the world's population. It's a horrible statistic. 7 out of 10 people live in countries where inequality has increased in the last 30 years. In that time since I was an economic hitman, 2.5 billion people today live below the poverty level of $2 a day, and another 2-3 billion survive on a little bit more than that, $3 or $4 billion a day. Here in the United States, and this is a tough fact, since the Depression ended, or recession ended in 2008, 1% of Americans have received 95% of the economic growth in this country, while 95% of us have gotten poorer. So what we're seeing here is absolutely a system in failure. It's not working. We need to create a new system, and we need to understand that this is just caused by a mindset, by a perceived reality that's no more powerful than that perceived reality that the British were undefeatable in 1773. We must change this. What we must do now is create what I would call, many are calling, a life economy. And this is an economy that's based on cleaning up pollution and regenerating devastated environments on this planet. And it's an economy that's based on technologies that will recycle, that we no longer need to dig up the oil, that we understand, that we can recycle, that we can have new technologies for energy, transportation, communications, wholesale and retail trade, banking, everything that contribute to a more living planet. And I think that it's fair to say, I have to say that in the last 12 years since Confessions came out, I've been traveling all over the world on a constant speaking tour. In places, I've been to China and Romania and all over the Middle East and Europe and Latin America and the United States. And everywhere I go, I find that people like you are waking up to the knowledge that we're living on a very fragile space station without shuttles. We can't get off. My 8-year-old grandson won't be able to get off. Maybe a few people will go to Mars or the moon, but most of us won't get off. We don't want to get off. We must create a life economy. And really, all that takes is a change of our perceived reality, of our imagined reality. People often think, well, we've got to go through a huge trauma to have things change. I don't believe that. I think that's the other possibility. But I know we can turn this around. We have the smarts to do it, don't you think? Can we do that? You can do it. You know, as I look out at you, I see people here who, some of you have influence in government and corporations. Some of you have influence in investor organizations and funds, and you have investments of your own. All of you shop. All of you consume. All of you depend on corporations, and many of you are part of corporations. We all know that there's nothing bad or good about corporations. They're just an imagined reality. A corporation is an imagined reality. It's what we decide to make it. And let's face it, in the past and perhaps in the present, we've chosen to say, hey, you know, I want inexpensive but good quality tennis shoes. And if they happen to be made by slaves in Indonesia, I'll just look the other way. I want cheap petroleum for my car, and if that means destroying the Amazon rainforest, I'll just look the other way. We must change that. You know, we need to come up with something better. So what I think is important at this critical moment in human history is to understand two objective realities. One is that corporations are the prime movers behind politics and economics, in fact, behind all of human societies all over the planet today. So it includes China, it includes Russia, it includes every place. And two, the corporations that will succeed in the future's already on us, are those that buy into this new consciousness, this new awareness, this new mindset, that we must create a life economy, one that cleans up pollution and creates regenerative and sustainable technologies, and that alleviates the causes of desperation and terrorism. That's another thing that the life economy will do. When I was in business school, the same professor of economic history who taught me about the fact that corporations had to prove that they served a public interest also warned us that corporations are becoming excessive in their pursuit of profits back then. And I actually have a quote that I wrote down from him. He said, "They'll take this to the extreme, but then there'll be a reckoning, a rebalancing, a recognition that corporations are indeed here to serve the public." That time has come. It's essential that we, you and I, and people around the world, redefine the goals of corporations, change that imagined reality, to know that corporations are here not simply to maximize profits. Their new goals should be, one, to make a decent return for investors. Yes, we need investors. We need to come up with new technologies that will recycle, that will not force us to dig up all of our resources and destroy the atmosphere and the air in the process. So we need to get a decent rate of return for investors. But then the second objective is to serve us, you and me, the public, the world, future generations, my 8-year-old grandson, not those 62 people and their friends who already are so wealthy. And in accomplishing these two goals, corporations will understand that they are serving themselves and ensuring their own success. So I just jotted down a few thoughts here. Imagine for a moment what this new reality might look like. Imagine your tax dollars going to pay corporations to, instead of building ever more powerful military devices that threaten to obliterate life as we know it, to instead develop processes for mining the islands of plastic floating in our oceans, to clean up and utilize the oil spills that saturate large swaths of the Amazon and other places, and to invent new and as yet unimagined technologies for energy, transportation, communications, marketing, the growing of foods, and other activities. Technologies that do not require destroying resources. You can't eat all of your food supply and expect to survive. You know, as a student of the American Revolution, which I loved studying the American Revolution, I had many ancestors who fought in it. Thomas Paine I'm a descendant of his, and I used to think, my God, I wish I'd been born in the 1700s so I could have fought in that revolution. But this is so much bigger. This is such a much more important revolution. It's global, and it's totally essential. And it's an awful lot more comfortable. The beds are better. The toilets are better. The food's better, I think.
Isn't the weapons better too?
The weapons are a lot better too, unfortunately, yes. Yes, you know, I recently read an article where somebody, I can't remember who it was, pointed out that we still have the emotional makeup of Neanderthals. You know, we get angry very easily as human beings. And we have the political system of the ancient Greeks. We have the business system of feudal medieval times, the feudal times, you know, the hierarchy. And we have the technology of gods. We can destroy ourselves and everything on this planet that we know. That's a pretty scary thought. And so what it takes is this change of mindset, this altered consciousness that we need to rise out of that Neanderthal mentality, amongst other things, and create new systems for doing that. You know, again, I'm going to bring this to a close pretty soon and open it to questions and discussions. But, you know, I just want to say that, again, as a student of the American Revolution, I used to think, and I still think, how fortunate we are that Tom Paine did not try to lead armies. And George Washington did not try to write pamphlets. Washington had a passion and skills for leading men, and Paine had a passion and skills for writing pamphlets. Martha Washington had a passion and skills for organizing women to make clothes for the men at the forefront. They all took different paths, but they all headed toward the same destination of getting out from under the British yoke. Just like you Irish. You got there too, eventually. You know, I think it's fair to say you have the power. I know that the people in this room actually represent a lot of power here in Washington. But people all over the world, every one of us has tremendous power. And it's just important to recognize that. You have passions. I don't know what each of your passions are, but I know you got them. So follow that passion. We can each take different paths, just like Washington and Paine and Martha Washington. Very different paths headed for the same destination. If we all take our individual paths, whether you're a doctor, a lawyer, a carpenter, a parent, whatever you are, use that passion to move us toward a life economy, to move us toward a future that my grandson, 8 years old, Grant, will want to inherit. And that means it's got to be a future that every child on this planet wants to inherit. Used to be we only had to worry about the United States for our children. Now we know that my 8-year-old grandson will not have a good future unless every child growing up in Ethiopia and Bolivia and every place else in the world has that same future. You have the power to make that happen, your passions. Again, growing up in New Hampshire, I had no idea that African Americans in parts of my country had to ride on the back of a bus until Rosa Parks showed me. How many of you know who Rosa Parks was? How many of you have heard of Rosa Parks? Who was Rosa Parks? A woman who walked to the front of a bus. She did a lot of other things, but that was the most significant thing. You could do that. And I had no idea growing up in New Hampshire that the DDT my dad and I sprayed on the swamp behind our house to kill mosquitoes was also killing fish and birds until Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring and started a whole worldwide environmental movement. How many of you have ever heard of Rachel Carson? Who was Rachel Carson? A woman who sat down at a desk, a tiny desk, in a little house in Pennsylvania, took out a piece of scrap paper and a pencil and started writing, having no idea her book would ever be published, much less that it would create an environmental movement around the world. You can do that. And how many of you have ever heard of Jack Woodbury or Dick Davis or Mrs. Schneer? Oh my God. Washington, D.C., I thought you were educated here. Well, Jack and Richard were my high school English and history teachers. And Mrs. Schneer was my third grade teacher. Without them, I wouldn't be here. Jack and Richard taught me the power of writing in history and changing history, and it is more powerful than a bullet, ultimately. That's why I write, because of Jack and Richard, teachers. And Mrs. Schneer, my third grade teacher, well, there was a bully in our third grade class. He was 15 years old in third grade. He didn't like me. And he used to beat me up in the playground. And I'd go running to Mrs. Schneer, and she didn't know what to do because up there in New Hampshire in those years, I think still there's a law that you have to stay in school till you're 16. So they could kick him out for a week, but they had to let him back in, and then he'd be meaner than ever. So one time I go running up to her, whimpering and crying, and she says, "Well, Johnny, I think you're just going to have to take care of this yourself." And I said, "But he's big." And she said, "Well, here's my advice. Next time he pushes you around, you just kick him in the shins and run like hell. I don't think she used the H word. I did. And a funny thing happened. He whimpered, and then he became my friend, my ally, my protector. And I learned this incredible lesson about how to deal with bullies. You gotta stand up to them, and then they join you. And I think if we look at this system, if we look at the way corporations are just working on maximizing profits, we'll see that that's a bullying system, and we got to stand up to it. It's time to stand up to these things. So, every one of you is a Mrs. Schneier or a Richard Davis or Jack Woodbury or a Rosa Parks. Every one of you has incredible passion. And you got talents. You got power. And now it's time to get out there for all of us to use this power to take part in this revolution, a consciousness revolution, an awakening. Are you ready to do this? Are you ready? Come on, Washington. Are you guys ready? Are you ready? I want to hear a big yes. I want to enlist you. All right. Thank you. I'm ready too. I'm ready to join you. And I want to leave you with a quote. I also want to mention that please take a look at my website, johnperkins.org. I do trips every year to the shamans of Colombia and Ecuador and Guatemala, and I'd love to have some of you join me, and it's all on my website, johnperkins.org. Also, put your email in a little box there, and you'll get my newsletter once a month. It's kind of fun. I just wrote a pretty provocative one that just came out. I think you'd enjoy that. So johnperkins.org. The quote I'd like to leave you with is 200 years old, a little more than that, but I think it's totally relevant to these times that we're talking about. It was written as the American Revolution was getting underway by Tom Paine. It's one of these things that triggered people to change their perceived reality. December 1776. Paine writes, "These are the times that try men's souls. The summer soldier and the sunshine patriot will, in this crisis, shrink from the service of their country. But he or she who stands by it now deserves the love and thanks of man and woman. A generous parent should say, if there must be trouble, let it be in my day that my child may have peace. If there must be trouble, let it be in our day that our children may have peace." Paine goes on to say, "I love the man or woman who can smile in trouble, who can gather strength from distress, and grow brave by reflection. By perseverance and fortitude, we have the prospect of a glorious future." I think that's why we're all here tonight. I think that's why you're born at this time, this incredibly important time in human history, and why you're here tonight, so that when my 8-year-old grandson is my age, many, many years out there, he'll look back and he'll say, thank God those people all came together in early March at the World Affairs Council, and every one of them committed to following his or her passions and using his or her skills to create a world that I and all my brothers and sisters around the planet will want to inherit. Thank God all of us came together to say that we have the perseverance and fortitude to find a glorious future. I look forward to doing that with you. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Hey, Mr. P., I thought that was a great talk you gave. I'm Abigail Woodward. I'm just a citizen. The things that I think would be really helpful would be two things. One would be if we had more women on corporate boards, and I go to think tank meetings at the Brookings and all over that talk about the difference that having women on corporate boards makes. And the other thing is, I think we need to be really aware of what's going on with intellectual property rights. And you're having worked with the shaman, you should know, all the stuff that he knew is now being commodified and stripped from the culture. So those are the two things I would like to hear you comment on.
Thank you. I'm so glad you brought up the women's issue, and it's something I usually talk about. Yes, you know, if we create this new life economy and we stay with the male hierarchical system that we have, we'll just get back to the problem all over again. I'm convinced of it. The women must take more power, and we men need to open the doors wider to that, but also you women just really need to get out there and take it. And we men also need to open ourselves more to our own feminine sides. I mean, we've all got that. As you women need to perhaps take a little bit more of the masculine to get out there and put yourselves in those positions. But absolutely, we must move in that direction. And this ties in a way with the other question about the indigenous people and property rights. And yeah, I mean, that's a big issue, and it's way beyond the scope of my knowledge as to how you deal with those things. But I'd like to think that you will look into that a lot more, both of those issues. This sounds like your passion. Get out there and get those women moving, and also the indigenous rights thing. And you know, the Pope just recently gave a beautiful speech in Mexico. I happened to be in Mexico at the time, and where he talked about indigenous rights, and he certainly has been an advocate of the indigenous movement there. But I'd like to just, a brief story. So several of times when I've been with, I go back to the Shuar people who I was, the Peace Corps volunteer with, and I go back at least once a year, every year, at least once, often many more times every year. You've been there too. And one of the things that comes up is a question that people sometimes ask indigenous people like the Shuar and the Achwa, what's the difference between men and women? And the answer is, well, they're equal and very different. And in many of these indigenous communities, it's known that men are the ones who cut the trees when you need a new dugout canoe or or something, a clearing. And they also kill the animals when you need protein. And if there's a war, they kill other men. And women take care of the plants and the babies. They're the nurturers. They take care of these systems. But in addition, there's something very important that women do, and that is to tell the men to stop. Don't kill any more animals. We've had enough protein. Don't cut any more trees. We don't need another dugout canoe. Because it's well known to them that men will just keep doing these things. It's the nature of men. And when these people come here, the Shuar, the Achwa, come here, they look around at all the buildings and so on, and they say, wow, this is a very masculine society. What's happened to the women? Why don't the women tell the men to stop? And sometimes our women will say, well, on the contrary, we sometimes ask for bigger houses. And the Shuar, the Achwa will say, why would you want bigger houses? You just got to clean them. Wouldn't you rather spend your time with your children and making love and doing other things than cleaning houses and so forth? I think it's really important that we understand there is this difference, and I think women have a consciousness that does open much. It's the womb, it's the nurturing side, it's the side that knows that we've got to take care of future generations and the planet, and I really thank you for bringing that up. So yes, we must move deeper and deeper to that feminine side and bring the feminine out of all of us. We men really need to open to that a lot more. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
Thank you. It's Dana Marshall, and you might want to invite your colleagues from Ecuador to come here maybe after January 20th to see about how women might change society. Certainly some of us hope that. Thanks very much for that talk. I did read your 2004 book, found it really interesting. I was largely in the same sort of field that you were in the US government, so it really sort of hit me pretty hard. And I think we've all seen a change of view, and certainly the issues that you're raising now are absolutely in the forefront of our own domestic election period. You put a lot of cards on the table, but let me see if I can focus you on one area. Maybe you can try to help us disaggregate this. You talked, and you were right to talk about the differences that corporations have made between thinking about their responsibilities to stakeholders like their employees and their communities and all of that in the world, to a shift to just focusing on shareholders. But when you have a situation like what happened a few days ago when Carrier, an air conditioning manufacturer, had announced that they were moving about 2,100 jobs out of Indiana, putting them into Mexico because of economic reasons. I guess my question to you, is that good or bad? I mean, from the Mexican point of view, there are going to be more Mexican jobs. It's certainly perceived by some that becomes, and Donald Trump, of course, has talked repeatedly about that particular offshoring. But I wonder, in your mind, is your objective to maximize, I mean, if your objective is to maximize more sort of global value, is that a good thing? And then what do you say, though, to those employees in Indiana that don't have the jobs? I wonder how, in your mind, someone that has the sort of values, and I share a lot of them with you, how do you disaggregate that in a world where there is a fight about jobs right now, where because of the economic slowdown, global trade has become almost a zero-sum game? How do you sort that out?
Wow, thank you. How much time do we have? That's a book, but I think I want to look at it from a macro standpoint, and that I think we have to understand that there really is no Mexico and no United States, and the problem really has been created again by this imagined reality. And part of the imagined reality that's created the problem with Carrier is NAFTA and CAFTA, the trade agreements. And these trade agreements have been set up in such a way, and I just came from Central America. I mentioned I was in Mexico. I was also in Guatemala, Costa Rica. I was in a lot of Central America just last month. And, these trade agreements, which we call free trade, and I'm all for true free trade, but this isn't true free trade. So what's happened is that we have subsidies in the United States. Those countries can't afford subsidies. The free trade agreements, NAFTA, CAFTA, cut out the ability to put tariffs on anything. So here's an example. Let's say that it costs in a U.S. agribusiness $5 for a unit to produce corn here in the United States. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to just be facing in that direction. And the Central American farmer can produce that same unit of corn for $3. But the U.S. government gives the agribusiness in the United States a $3 subsidy. So in fact, the U.S. producer can sell that unit of corn for something above $2 in Central America, let's say $2.50. And the Central American farmer has to sell it for more than $3 to make a living. So all these Central American farmers have gone out of business. And they're swarming now into the United States. That's what we call an immigration problem. It's not an immigration problem. I mean, it is. It's become that. That's the objective reality created by this perceived reality, this law, this system. And at the same time, it's opened the door for corporations like Carrier, and all the big agribusinesses are now going in and taking over land and using the benefits of desperate people who have to come off the farm to grow broccoli on land that huge areas, and flowers that are exported to the United States, and to open the door for companies like Carrier to go in and take advantage of the cheap labor that's desperate. So if we want to do away with that problem, the way to do it is to truly equalize, to truly have free trade, and say the United States can't subsidize these businesses. Or if we do subsidize them here, then those countries have a right to put a tariff on them. But we've done it in a way that totally benefits these big corporations and makes it very easy to go in and for cheap labor. And that's happened all over. And TTIP and TPP will do it on a much larger scale. And so we really need to be careful. And then again, I'd like to say, and go on record, I'm totally for free trade. But this isn't free trade. These free trade agreements are the opposite of free trade. We really need to look at these systems that we've created that are terribly, terribly imbalanced and favor big corporations like the TTIP and TPP. Make corporations more sovereign than the governments where they work. It means that if they lose profits under some circumstances in other countries, they can actually sue the countries for lost profits. That's ridiculous. That's just terrible. We need to take a good, hard look at these systems. And I also want to say something about you mentioning, Hillary being president. And I want to also say how important it is, I think, for all of us to understand that the next president will be very symbolic. We see all this, this incredible divergence out there. But also to recognize that the president of the United States really has very limited power. One of the powers we thought the president had was to put somebody on the Supreme Court. We're discovering now the president may very well not have that power, probably doesn't have that power necessarily. And presidents have very limited power. Even if we get a president who's not beholden to big corporations, let's say Bernie Sanders wins and he owes no money to corporations, he'll be surrounded by senators and House of Representative people who are beholden to big corporations, as well as over 100,000 lobbyists, about 13,000 registered lobbyists and another 90,000 lobbyists who aren't registered as such. They call themselves political consultants, et cetera. So we need to recognize that, it's not enough. You can't, if your candidate gets elected, don't sit back and say, she won or he won and now let them do their thing. We, the people, have to do it. We have to take control. And we have to recognize that these big corporations are totally dependent on us to buy their goods and services, to invest in them, and to support them through our tax dollars and our government policies. They're totally dependent on us. I know a lot of CEOs who want to do the right thing are afraid to do the right thing because they're afraid that if they lose 0.5% of market share, they'll lose their jobs. They want you to get out there and they want you to pick a corporation, Monsanto, Chevron, Nike, Walmart, I don't care. Pick some corporation that you'd like to see do something a little better and launch a campaign. All your Facebook friends, all your tweets, all your emails every week, send out to all your people and ask them to send out to all their people a statement that says, you don't want to make anybody enemies, but that says something like, I love your product, but I'm not going to buy them anymore until you do whatever. Pay your workers in Indonesia a fair salary, clean up the pollution, the oil pollution that you're creating, whatever the goal is. And when the executives have enough of these emails coming in, then they can go to their executive committees, their major stockholders, and say, hey, listen, these are our customers. We've got to change. We've got to move into this life economy. And that will be the success story of the future, the corporations that really take a leadership. I'm all for corporations, but I want to see them move in a new direction. Thanks. I took a long way to answer that question. Thanks so much.
Hi, John. Steve Davis, long-term member of the World Affairs Council. We met briefly at a Green Festival years ago. In follow-up to the first question, I think what you're talking about is the ancient concept of yin and yang, a balance between the principles of the universe. Follow-up to the second question, it appears that capital is always global and free-moving, labor is always local, and stymied by capital and the vested interests of capital, which are the driving force behind the short-term interests of the trade agreements, including the TPP, which is a giant game changer in terms of national and local sovereignty. I asked Alfred Stieglitz several years ago whether the people at the top of the economic pyramid understood that when the pyramid cracks and crumbles, they're the ones who are going to be falling the farthest and hitting the hardest. And he said, I don't know. It appears that the founders of many American corporations understood the relationship between themselves and the people at large. I don't think the current occupants of the CEO chairs understand that relationship. Could you comment on that, please?
Sure, I'd like to. I recently was invited to speak to to be the opening speech at a summit of 4,000 CEOs. And I called the organizers and said, I think you've made a mistake. Got the wrong John Perkins. And they said, no, we want you here. And I said, why? And he said, because our members are intelligent people. And they understand that the system isn't working. They get it. They don't know what to do about it. I think that, are you referring to the Stiglitz who won the Nobel Prize in Economics, former chief economist of the World Bank, Joe Stiglitz? I think Joe, I would think he would know, but I certainly have found as I talk to these executives that many of them want change. And even those that we might call sociopaths who don't really care will be influenced if we let them know that the only way they're going to be successful is to create a life economy, to move in a new direction. I think most of all the ones that I know are very good people, and they'd like to see us create a better world. But they're scared that if they, as I said, lose 0.5% of market share, they'll lose their jobs and be replaced by someone who only cares about market share. So we, the people, have to be the ones to constantly let them know. And it's so easy. Consumer revolts are so easy these days with the social networking. And incidentally, we've had amazing success in the past. When I was in college, there was apartheid in South Africa. We boycotted, a small number of people boycotted those corporations that supported apartheid. And they got rid of it. The Charles River in Boston, where I went to school, reeked so badly of pollution, you couldn't walk beside it. And the rivers in Ohio were on fire with pollution. We forced corporations to clean them up. Again, a small number of people. We get people to open their doors wider to women and minorities. Yes, we need to do that continually, but we got them to label foods. GMOs, not yet, but calorie content and how much sugar and all these other things. We have tremendous power when we just use it. The marketplace is a democracy if we'll just use it that way. And these corporations want to see that. So I think that most of the people at the top that I know do understand that there's a serious problem here. You'd have to be stupid not to understand it. They're not stupid. They don't know what to do about it. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us for World Affairs Today, a production of the World Affairs Council, Washington, D.C. Stay connected with us at www.worldaffairstoday.org.